11:56 p.m., November 2nd, 2025, 2 airborne gas stations, $2 billion bombers, and a single 0.8-second window that turned an 1.8 billion Russian strike into a strategic catastrophe. What followed wasn't chaos. It was a meticulously timed kill chain that erased 2 of Russia's last strategic tankers and shredded Moscow's ability to project long-range air power for months. This is how Ukraine waited, watched, and then blew a $250 million warplane and more and out of the sky. 11:56 p.m., November 2nd, 2025. High above Belarus, after a devastating strike that left $1.8 billion of damage in its wake, a Russian bomber wing called home. Over a wideband channel, a pilot reported what he assumed was routine. Tankers are rock solid, mission success. At that moment, Moscow believed the job was done. They had counted on friendly airspace, predictable procedures, and the survival of their airborne refueling backbone. They were wrong. 1 week earlier, President Zelensky had issued a simple, brutal calculus. For every strategic asset Ukraine lost, Russia would lose 2. That promise moved from rhetoric to operational order in less than 32 minutes. The response was surgical, not indiscriminate, designed to break capability, not just score headlines, but... At 10:47 p.m., from the Machulichi Air Base in Belarus, 2 Il-78 M9A tankers, among the last fully operational in the Russian inventory, climbed into the night. Each Il-78 is a flying gas station estimated at roughly $150 million, capable of carrying up to 238,000 pounds of TS-1 jet fuel. Escorting them were 4 Tu-22 M3 backfire bombers, roughly $400 million more in strategic air power. This was not a simple mission. It was a statement of force intended to enable deep strikes and deny Ukraine the ability to contest returns. At 11:20 p.m., 16 Kh-32 cruise missiles fell from those bombers and streaked toward Chernihiv at speeds approaching Mach 4. The blast that followed flattened storage, destroyed radars, and inflicted immediate economic and military loss. 3 HIMARS warehouses were destroyed in secondary detonations, and 2 American-made ENTPQ-53 counter-battery radars were permanently silenced. Ukraine paid a heavy price in material that night, $1.8 billion in less than 5 minutes. The Russian bombers had achieved their objective and began their predictable turn home. They still needed fuel. Believing themselves invulnerable under a friendly air defense umbrella, the Il-78s took up station over southern Belarus for refueling operations. That assumption, that operating within Belarusian airspace equated to safety, became the second fatal Russian miscalculation. The damage report from Chernihiv reached President Zelensky's desk in Kyiv. The response was immediate and surgical. Operation Hose Sniper 2.0 was authorized, with tactical command granted full discretion on timing. The order moved through secure channels and settled on the desks of commanders who had been holding assets in reserve for 2 days, waiting for a single signal. This was deliberate patience, a sterile digital ambush orchestrated 16,000 feet above the earth. For hours, 6 Leica 100 high-altitude sensors, the ghosts of the operation, tracked every thermal signature across the corridor. At 00:12 a.m., the predictable moment arrived. The Russian air wing descended to 15,000 feet to begin in-flight refueling. Through the Leica thermal lens, a single glowing hot point appeared on the lead Il-78's left wing. The refueling probe climbed, heating to roughly 410 degrees Fahrenheit as it made contact. The trigger was pulled. Deep below in the frozen Nerovla forest, 8 Bayraktar TB2s sat in silence, batteries cold, payload secured. Their mission profile was not to win an air duel, but to shape the environment above it. On the radar screens of the S-400 battery at Baranovichi, 4 high-priority targets materialized, screaming toward sovereign airspace. But those targets were fakes, hollow decoys designed to look real on passive and active sensors. What followed was textbook exploitation of an automated decision loop. The S-400's fire control logic initiated an intercept sequence. 2848 N6DM interceptors launched in ripple fire, each missile costing more than the entire decoy squadron combined. The interceptors tracked true, and one by one, the 4 hollow decoys were vaporized in brilliant flashes. The sacrifice was complete. $56 million of Russia's finest air defense expended to destroy roughly $40,000 of disposable decoy. That expenditure achieved two aims. First, it significantly degraded the S-400 battery at Baranovichi, emptying launch tubes and forcing a reload cycle. Second, it drew additional local fire. A Panzer S-1 short-range unit engaged the decoys with 30mm cannon fire, dumping magazines and creating the precise 30-second reload window Ukrainian planners had calculated into their timing. With ground defenses momentarily neutralized, only the fighter escorts remained as immediate threats to the incoming miniature attack package. The next element arrived from the stratosphere. A Ukrainian RIM-2 ballistic missile launched from near Kharkiv at 0025 reached its designated coordinates and detonated at 17,000 feet above the lead Il-78. It did not detonate to create blast damage. It detonated to shape sensors. The warhead used a dual-purpose payload. Some 200 tungsten fragments generated a cloud of radar reflective clutter, while a localized electromagnetic pulse produced a momentary sensory blackout. For the Russian fighter crews, the night went white. Their AESA radars were flooded with noise. Displays overran into a snowstorm of false returns, leaving pilots deaf and blind for exactly 12 seconds, a brutally specific window. Within that interval, 4 real Bayraktar TB2s, having loitered low over the forest at roughly 150 feet, commenced their ascent. This was synchronized execution. 4 small platforms, a single objective, executed by 4 Ukrainian pilots. The first TB2, callsign TB201, attacked from the north. Its laser designation painted an invisible point on engine number 2 of the lead Il-78. After 9.2 seconds, the missile seeker acquired and struck, shredding fan blades and effectively turning a $15 million engine into a drag anchor. The tanker lurched violently and began an immediate, predictable descent. A wounded, heavy target at cruise speed is a missile magnet. Almost simultaneously, TB202 attacked from the northeast. Its targeting locked on the reinforced coupling where the 222M3's refueling probe docked with the tanker hose. The missile sheared the coupling like a high-speed blade, severing the mechanical link and creating a leak path. Jet fuel began to pour. An atomized geyser measured in gallons per minute, and a volatile fuel vapor cloud began to envelop the wounded tanker. The fuel was the fuse, the rest of the plan supplied the match. From the south, TB203 struck the auxiliary fuel tank on the Il-78's left wing. Its warhead was packed with high explosives capable of reliably igniting fuel vapors. Upon impact, a 420-degree fireball formed. TB204, approaching from the west, painted the second tanker's right-wing auxiliary tank. That missile functioned as insurance, a follow-on to guarantee annihilation. The arrival sequence was surgical. The first 3 missiles converged at 0 hours, 28 minutes, 30 seconds within the same horrifying fraction of a second. Exactly 0.8 seconds after the 222M3 probe made full contact with the Il-78's hose, thermite and incendiary effects detonated. The spark hit the fuel cloud, and this was not a localized burn. It was a fuel-air explosion. The vaporized jet fuel mixed with air and became the charge. 238,000 pounds of TS. One essentially turned the air into a bomb. The lead Il-78 was destroyed in an instant. The spine of the aircraft failed. Structural integrity collapsed at frame 42. The tanker tore in half and plunged earthward at a 47-degree angle, dragging one of the tethered 222M3s with it like a stone. The shockwave from the first detonation struck the second Il-78 just as TB204's missile punctured its wing tank. The second tanker detonated in a catastrophic chain reaction. At 002842, a second blast bleached the night, transforming it momentarily into day. The Russian escorts cleared their screens from the EMP-induced snowstorm and saw only a blossom of inferno where their tankers had been minutes earlier. Silence gave way to fury. A MiG-31 pilot, number 217 in unit logs, launched a long-range R-37M at 002838, but the temporary sensor blackout prevented a firm lock. The missile flew wild and missed by roughly 18 miles. And Su-35 number 04 fired a 9M96 E-27 seconds later. Its seeker locked on the largest radar return, a burning wing, and destroyed falling debris, not the attack package. A third to 35, number 07, read the battlefield differently. He presumed culprits would be small, low, and running. His thermal imager scanned tree lines and found a fleeting heat signature. TB-204, the drone that had crippled the second tanker, attempting escape. The Russian pilot engaged in a low-altitude intercept. Closing to 800 meters, he brought his GSH-30-1 cannon to bear and fired a 3-barrel stream of 30mm rounds at 3 times the speed of sound. TB-204 evaporated into a cloud of carbon fiber and electronics. A small secondary flash in the night, a footnote to the main inferno. The 3 remaining Ukrainian TB-2s melted back into the canopy. One did not return. It was a small but calculated price for a strategic masterstroke. When the digital battlefield fell silent, the immediate material tally was stark. 2 Il-78M9. 8 tankers gone, 2 Tu-22M3 bombers taken as collateral, roughly $560 million of advanced aviation hardware reduced to burning scrap in a Belarusian field. But the strategic cost to Russia went far beyond dollars. With those tankers destroyed, the Kremlin now had fewer than 8 operational Il-78 tankers across its global force. Long-range aviation, the instrument that enabled strikes deep into Ukraine, was effectively crippled. Russia's ability to deliver strategic airstrikes beyond roughly 400 miles was all but removed. Russian command characterized the outcome internally as a 6-month operational castration. Panic rippled through Russian headquarters. Remaining tankers were evacuated to remote facilities in Siberia for protection. Operational reach was reduced. Sortie rates for long-range missions were constrained by fuel and tanker shortfalls. Operation Hose Sniper was not an isolated tactical victory. It was a campaign enabler. It signaled a doctrine: exploit predictable procedural vulnerabilities, use low-cost sensors and munitions to shape high-value engagements, and impose asymmetric costs that force strategic recalculation. That night was only the opening act. While the tankers burned in Belarus, Ukraine executed a nationwide sequence of follow-on effects. Hundreds of miles to the east, 40 long-range loitering munitions slammed into the Ryazan oil refinery, igniting the primary distillation unit and turning it into a column of fire visible from 50 miles away. Near Voronezh, a swarm of strike drones bypassed local air defenses to hit the electron plant, a key guidance system facility, gutting avionics assembly lines essential for Russia's guided munition production. In Bryansk, a surgical explosive drone targeted a traction substation powering the main railway to the front. It did not destroy tracks, but it cut power and paralyzed military rail movements for days. This was a coordinated, multi-front assault on the nervous system of Russia's war machine: logistics, aviation fuel, guidance production, and rail mobility, executed with synchronized precision. The political fallout was immediate. At 4:11 that morning, President Lysenko placed an emergency call to Putin. "You told me my airspace was safe." Allies moved quickly. The United States and Poland announced a joint $5 billion aid package that fast-tracked deliveries of ATACMS long-range missiles and 300 Switchblade 600 loitering munitions. From a narrow cost-benefit lens, this operation was devastatingly efficient. Ukraine launched the revenge operation in response to a $1.8 billion strike. The total cost to Ukraine, including the ballistic missile, smart munitions, and a lost drone, was roughly $8.5 million. That expenditure produced $560 million in direct hardware losses to Russia and systemic effects that forced strategic redistribution of Russian assets. The operation's reported return on investment, more than 65-1, underscored a new reality in modern war. Strategic leverage comes from the ability to turn a fraction of the battlefield into a decisive vulnerability. This engagement also altered geopolitics. Humiliated and strategically cornered, the Kremlin moved on November 6th to accept a volunteer contingent from North Korea. Reports cited 10,000 soldiers and 5,000 combat engineers. Whether symbolic or practical, the move signaled acute manpower shortages and catalyzed alarms across East Asia. South Korea and Japan went to high alert. European capitals doubled down on sanctions and defense postures. Western aid packages followed the operational logic revealed in the night's strikes. ATAC-CMS gave Ukraine the ability to replicate strategic host sniper strikes at range. Switchblade 600 supplemented ground interdiction and counter-assault options. Sweden's Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson publicly framed the moment as an inflection point. The West could no longer treat Russia as a negotiable partner. He called for permanent economic isolation and a sustained European defense buildup, arguing that the conflict had moved from crisis to long-term confrontation. On the battlefield, the dynamic was clear. Russian forces continued grinding forward in places like Provsk, using mass and attrition to seize ground at horrific human cost, 34 square miles a week paid in blood. Against that, Ukrainian innovation and asymmetric precision created strategic space and reduced operational costs for Kremlin planners. The result was a bifurcated reality. Brutal, conventional attrition on the front lines combined with surgical, high-value strikes that clipped Russian sustainment and reach. The practical question now facing Ukrainian commanders is transactional. With fresh deliveries of ATAC-MS and Switchblade 600s, where to concentrate firepower? Use ATAC-MS to push the envelope. More Operation Host sniper strikes deep inside Russian logistics? Or deploy Switchblades and precision munitions to blunt the massed Russian advance at Provsk and stabilize front lines? Both options are valid, and both reshape the calculus of future operations. What is indisputable is the operational lesson. The winning side in this era is defined less by the cost of its platforms and more by the agility of its doctrine. The capacity to turn a 0.8-second vulnerability into months of operational paralysis. A cheap, coordinated package of sensors, decoys, low-cost missiles, and precisely timed munitions can collapse multi-billion-dollar systems when doctrine, timing, and targeting align. This engagement will be studied for years. How automation can be baited, how sensor saturation becomes a weapon when combined with EMP shaping, and how a handful of small drones and guided munitions can yield strategic effects that outsize their unit cost. It is a clear signal that future conflicts will increasingly reward actors who can integrate inexpensive, networked effects into decisive kill chains. The night of November 2nd to 3rd, 2025, drew a line in the sand. On one side, the Kremlin is resorting to tactical mass and external manpower solutions. On the other hand, Ukraine is demonstrating that innovation, foresight, and carefully timed lethality can turn procedural predictability into strategic opportunity. The next chapters will depend on supply, adaptation, and political endurance, and on whether either side can break the other's ability to impose its tempo on the battlefield. If you were the Ukrainian commander receiving new ATAC-MS and Switchblade 600 shipments, which would you prioritize? Replicate deep strategic strikes to keep Russia's logistics and refueling capability paralyzed? Or invest in tactical defenses that blunt the massed Russian ground advance?